I'm Michael Platten, Benjamin Platten's father. Well, I have this antique glass passion that I've had for quite a few years now, ever since, well, maybe the late 70s. My kids say I have the proclivity to collect. I've always collected things, like went to Fairmount Park and collected garnets as a child and had a huge garnet collection. You know, rocks, feathers, the model cars as a kid. Never Hot Wheels, but I built model cars and displayed them. I always liked displaying stuff. In my room I had little displays. I had a roommate in my 20s. We were friends from our teens, and he was a Center City kid and became interested in bottles when they started doing excavations in his neighborhood, and he unearthed a lot of bottles. He had a collection in the apartment that we shared that took up a whole wall, and he put it where light could shine right through it. It was very nice. I was captivated, and I swore when I had the means that I would collect bottles too. Well, my first bottle probably came at an antique store or something down in South Street. And then when your mother and I started antiquing out in Delaware County, I got a really old Bitters bottle for a few bucks and some other bottles at an antique store at Grady's Corner. It was right near a beautiful park. Were made by hand, by a person 100 or more years ago, 150, 200. And what all that means is you're holding in your hand a piece of history. I don't see myself as the owner of these bottles. I see myself as the curator and the custodian of the bottle for the time being. And hopefully, under my care, it will stay in one piece and without damage, and I'll be able to pass it on to someone else who will enjoy it, as I did. And I believe that every bottle tells a story. You'll look at the bottle and you'll know exactly why a bottle has bubbles, because the batch may have contained too much of one mineral. You'll know why the bottle had whittle marks in it, is because the mold was cold when the hot glass hit it, and it may have been one of the first bottles made that day. And you'll see an unusual bottle, and that bottle might be one that a guy will have done on his lunch break or after work when he started throwing back a few beers, because honestly, most bottles were created because the water was unpotable, poisonous, and everybody drank ale and beer instead of water because people were dying of stomach problems when they drank water. The three things that you'll find most of the uses of the bottles that I collect were utilitarian, which is a water, oil, grease, or wine, some liquor. Then there's a bottle that would hold mineral water, because people did drink water, those that could afford it. And there was a huge industry in the 1800s. And the third would be medicines, and what became known as America's first real big industry, which is quack cures. A whole bunch of snake oil salesmen would bottle their grandmother's sweat and put it into a bottle with about 50% alcohol, and people would drink it. And incidentally, it wasn't all they put in it. They would put in a number of narcotic remedies and poisons, opiates, cocaine, and all of it was given to children as well as adults to cure whatever they said it would cure. The thing about bottles is they mostly were preserved in trash pits, where these giant pits where people would throw ashes from their fire. They would throw trash, bottles, any other refuse of the house, food scraps. So it was a toss-up whether the bottle would survive. But mostly bottles would survive when they were thrown into privy pits, which were basically outhouse, stone-lined pits, where there would be an outhouse on top. Generally, men or women would bring a bottle of beer in with them, or whiskey, or what have you. And since their wife didn't like them drinking, they would go drink in the outhouse, and then they would come home. Or they would go out in the outhouse after dinner and come back and be in a hell of a lot better mood after drinking their whiskey or beer or what have you. and the bottle, the proof, would go down forever hidden in the outhouse pit. And that's how layers upon layers of bottles would be preserved, and a lot of them today survive because they had been covered in what I told you, covered with worms with pit. Well, when I was actively selling and buying bottles, I would meet people all the time, diggers, guys who were construction workers who would dig up bottles on the construction site, and I would buy 10 bottles at a time off of them, clean them up and sell them or keep them. A lot of them I sell, make the money that I need to buy what I really like, which are really old, crude, handmade bottles without a mold. They're called free blown. Those are the oldest bottles, sometimes the most difficult to find. It's all in the method of manufacture, whether the top is applied after it's been blown, whether there are mold marks, how many pieces of the mold. I think that you look at the side of a bottle, you'll be able to understand by looking at the mold lines just exactly how it was made. I'll give you an example. The bottle that I am holding here has a mold line right up the side, as if there was two halves of the mold. It was literally blown in a mold and opened up. Then a rod was stuck with the molten glass on the bottom, and you would hold the bottle on the rod and apply. See, this top came out sort of without this lip. This was applied separately. You can see that they took a piece of glass and whirled it around with a tool and attaching it while it was still hot. Then they snapped off the rod and your bottle was done, leaving bubbles in the glass and a snapped off pontil mark. This bottle would be dated before the Civil War, 1850s or 60s, made in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, by a guy named Sheets. So let me compare that to another bottle which has absolutely no lines. This bottle, you can see, doesn't look anything like this bottle. The glass in this bottle has been refined and clear. The batch on that is aquamarine. The batch on this is God knows what. It's probably they just took a bunch of sand, melted it down. It's full bubbles, impurities. It was just blown like a sack. This is called a junk bottle, Ludlow bottle, or well, you name it. They have a bunch of names. It's also called a globular flask, circa 1780. Again, applied top separately, jagged pontil mark. As I said, this one has a special story about it, where I got it. It's from an old collection of a friend of mine who passed away. He's an astute collector who found that in an antique shop in the area. That one, like I said, is very old and crudely made. And I have another one that also is just about as old. And this is even older probably than that. This would be a scientific piece of glass called belle cloche, made up of 3 pieces of glass. The bell, which is blown separate, the handle, which was applied with a glob when hot, and the lip, which is made to strengthen the edge. They put another piece of glass around it. This is about 1800, and you would have seen this in a laboratory with a flower maybe underneath it. And again, note the color of the glass. They did not have purifying chemicals or know what they were doing. It also has big chunks of undissolved slag suspended in the glass. I have to say that my feelings toward the bottles haven't changed. I think it's more like my intensity. It was like chasing a high when you were bidding on a bottle or in a format where you were buying bottles. I have to admit that since I'm not actively involved in it anymore, my passion for it has waned a little. But I'm sure that I could regain the passion if I got back into bidding. But since I'm no longer buying, not that the collection is complete, it's just that I am done collecting, my interest has cooled off. I think I will. I think I'll always be involved with the history of it. The bottle being a capsule of history, a time frame, freeze frame, like a snapshot in history of when people built things, made things by hand, and that time's really gone. The craftsmanship, the artisanal way of making things that our utilitarian is completely gone. But I do think that I'll always look at them as pieces of art and history. I would tell them that they should dig and really get the passion that way. Go down, get somebody's permission, go in someone's backyard, learn how to dig for bottles and really learn how to do that. And that's the greatest way to start. Go to bottle shows, don't go online and do auctions. The tabletop antique shows are the way to go to get the real deals. You can really find diamonds in a rough from some of the vendors there. So that's what I would say. When the COVID dies down, go to the tabletop antique and bottle shows. Thank you.